It's just before dark. The sky, the particular shade of blue that hasn't quite decided to become night. Cars are pulling in from the main road, headlights cutting slow arcs across the gravel as drivers pick their spots. Kids already out of the back seat. Someone is walking towards the concession stand with a handful of change. The screen is white and enormous and waiting. Maybe you came with your parents when you were young enough to be carried back to the car. Maybe you drove yourself, years later with someone in the passenger seat. Either way, you know this place. The speaker hanging on the half-rolled window, the smell of warm asphalt and popcorn, the sound of gravel under the car tires. At their peak in 1958, there were more than 4,000 drive-in movie theaters in the United States. Today, there are around 300. Most of the land they sat on is now shopping center, a subdivision, or a big box store. The disappearance was the result of set pressures, economic, technological, and legislative, the accumulation over approximately 30 years until the drive-in almost became a historical artifact. The entrance had a toll booth, usually a small wooden structure where teenagers took your money. In the early years, it was often priced per person. Later, many theaters shifted to a flat rate per carload, which made it one of the genuine bargains in American entertainment. A family of 5 could see a double feature for what 2 adult tickets in an indoor theater would cost. When you arrived, you pulled in along a row of speaker posts, metal poles about window height, each with a small rectangular speaker hanging from a hook. You rolled your window down just enough, hung the speaker on the glass, and rolled it back up. The sound was tiny and imperfect, with faint crackles if the connection was loose. Before the film started, the screen ran a series of slides, advertisements for concession stand, intermission countdowns with animated hot dogs and dancing drinks. The cartoon hot dog telling you to come to the snack bar is one of those images that, once seen, stays permanently. It ran in theaters across the country for years, and almost everyone who saw it remembers it the same way. The concession stand was the financial center of the operation. A low concrete building in the middle of the lot lit up brighter than anything else on the property. Popcorn, candy, hot dogs, hamburger, fountain drinks. On a warm Friday night, the line stretched out the door and halfway across the gravel. The 10 minutes between the opening slides and the first feature was timed, whether anyone planned it that way or not, to send a large portion of the audience towards the counter at once. The concession margin was how most drive-ins actually made their money. Ticket prices alone rarely covered the overhead. The double feature was a standard. You got 2 films for one admission, usually one reasonably current paired with something older or low budget. The first film started at dusk. The second began whenever the first ended, which meant you would be leaving the lot well past midnight. Families with young children often left after the first film. Teenagers and couples often stayed for both. Nobody came to check. The experience was genuinely different from an indoor theater. You could talk, you could move around. Children could fall asleep in the back seat and be carried inside without fully waking up. You could bring food from home, adjust the volume on the speaker, step outside for air without disrupting anyone around you. The drive-in accommodated behavior that indoor theaters couldn't tolerate, and that flexibility was a large part of why families returned to it summer after summer. In the summer, the lot would be full by the time the first slide appeared. Cars parked in row after row, angled towards the screen, engines off. You could hear other families, a laugh from 2 rows back, a car door closing, the crunch of gravel under someone's feet hitting to the concession stand. It was communal in a way that still felt private. That particular combination was harder to find than it sounds. The first pressure came not from the entertainment industry, but from the ground itself. Drive-in theaters required large, flat parcels of land on the edge of town and cities where property was cheap. Through the post-war years, that described a lot of American real estate. But as suburban development pushed outward in the 1960s and 1970s,
these were real meals made by real families. From split-level houses in Ohio to ranch homes in California, dinner had to make sense during one of the most economically challenging decades in modern American history. Inflation was rising, gas was scarce, budgets were tight. Families sat down to hearty, filling meals night after night. So let's dig into 25 ground beef classics that quietly kept America fed through the inflation crisis, gas shortages, and the turbulence of the early 1970s. And if you're enjoying this trip through food history, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss what we uncover next. 1. Dutch oven meatloaf with crackers. Nothing captures early 70s ingenuity quite like stretching a meatloaf with a full sleeve of saltines. Between 1972 and 1974, beef prices jumped nearly 40% after herd reductions and price controls under President Nixon created unintended chaos. Home cooks responded the only way they knew how, by making do. The mixture went into a greased Dutch oven, topped with strips of bacon and baked low and slow. The crackers absorbed the fat, giving the loaf a tender, almost airy texture, while the bacon created a glossy mahogany finish. 2. Tater tot casserole. Before Instagram sheet pan dinners, there was tater tot casserole, golden, bubbling, and proudly practical. Introduced in the 1950s, tater tots became a budget hero in the 1970s. A single bag could top an entire casserole and feed 6 people. Ground beef browned with onions formed the base. Cream of mushroom soup mixed with sour cream added creaminess. Cheddar melted across the top. Then came the frozen tots, lined up neatly before heading into the oven. 40 minutes later, you had crispy potatoes on top and creamy, savory filling underneath. 3. Sloppy Joes. Sloppy Joes hit their cultural peak in the early 70s. With 1 pound of ground beef and an inexpensive can of sauce, dinner was handled. Brown the beef, stir in the sauce, simmer, and pile it high onto soft white buns. Sweet, tangy, and unapologetically messy, it was kid favorite and parent lifesaver. No complicated prep, no expensive ingredients, just working class fuel served in front of the television. 4. Beef tacos. The early 70s marked America's first big mainstream embrace of Tex-Mex flavors. Taco kits made exotic food feel accessible. Ground beef simmered with a seasoning packet became the filling for crispy corn shells, topped with lettuce, tomatoes, cheddar, and sour cream. Were they authentic? Not even close, but they were a gateway, an introduction to flavors beyond meat and potatoes. Taco night felt adventurous without being risky. 5. Beef paprikash. Hungarian immigrants brought paprikash to the Midwest long before the 70s, but during tight economic times, ground beef replaced pricier cuts. Onions, sweet paprika, broth, and sour cream created a rich, brick-red sauce poured over egg noodles. It was comforting, deeply flavorful, and budget-conscious, an old-world dish adapted to new-world realities. 6. Stuffed cabbage rolls. Known as golapki or dolted kapusta, stuffed cabbage rolls became Sunday staples in working-class neighborhoods. Tender cabbage leaves wrapped around a mixture of ground beef and rice, then baked in sweet and sour tomato sauce. They took time, they required patience, but they showed care. In an era when many women were still expected to manage the household full-time, these rolls were proof that dinner wasn't just a meal, it was love. 7. TV dinner Salisbury steak. Swanson's frozen dinners boomed as dual-income households increased, but many families recreated Salisbury steak at home. Ground beef patties mixed with breadcrumbs and onion soup mix were pan-fried, then smothered in brown gravy. It wasn't steak, but it didn't need to be. Served in front of the TV, it symbolized convenience meeting nostalgia. 8. Calico beans. A potluck favorite, calico beans combined ground beef, bacon, and several types of beans in a sweet, sticky sauce made from ketchup, brown sugar, mustard, and molasses. It baked into something rich, smoky, and deeply satisfying. Cheap ingredients, big flavor, perfect for feeding a crowd. 9. Johnny Marzetti. This baked pasta casserole, ground beef, egg noodles, tomato sauce, and layers of cheese was a Midwestern legend, easy to assemble, endlessly adaptable, and perfect for stretching ingredients. It showed up everywhere, from church suppers to school cafeterias. 10. Beef and potato casserole. Layers of thinly sliced potatoes, seasoned ground beef, and creamy mushroom sauce baked into a filling one-dish meal. It was meat and potatoes philosophy in casserole form, simple, hearty, and dependable.
11. Cocktail meatballs. No 1970s gathering was complete without sweet and savory meatballs simmered in chili sauce and grape jelly. They were glossy, toothpick-ready, and surprisingly addictive. The sauce sounded strange but worked beautifully. They weren't about authenticity, they were about hosting with confidence. 12. Cowboy casserole. Ground beef, corn, tomato soup, and cheese topped with biscuit dough baked into a hearty skillet meal. It was bold, filling, and built for hungry families who valued substance over presentation. 13. Beef and rice skillet. One pan, ground beef, rice, vegetables, broth. Simmered together until tender and flavorful. Minimal cleanup, maximum payoff. Efficiency was the point. Hamburger stew. On cold winter nights, hamburger stew simmered for hours. Ground beef, potatoes, carrots, celery, tomatoes, and broth. It was practical, comforting, and endlessly stretchable. 14. Cheeseburger pie. Thanks to Bisquick's impossible pie magic, ground beef and cheddar baked into a self-forming crust. It sliced like pie, but tasted like a cheeseburger. Space-age convenience at its peak. 15. Swedish meatballs. Americanized Swedish meatballs simplified tradition into ground beef balls seasoned with nutmeg and allspice, simmered in creamy gravy. Served over noodles with cranberry sauce, they felt festive without being complicated. Hamburger gravy over mashed potatoes. A Depression-era holdover that thrived in the 70s, hamburger gravy turned 1 pound of beef into dinner for 6. Flour, milk, and beef fat created a thick, peppery gravy poured over mashed potatoes. It was humble, it was comforting, it worked. 16. Beef and cabbage skillet. Cabbage was cheap and filling. Cooked down with ground beef and onions, it became tender, sweet, and deeply savory. It stretched budgets without sacrificing flavor. 17. Meatloaf muffins. By baking meatloaf in muffin tins, cooks cut the cooking time in half. Each portion developed a caramelized crust all around, practical and kid-approved. 18. Porcupine rice bake. Uncooked rice mixed directly into ground beef, baked in tomato sauce until the grains puffed up like tiny quills. It was clever, economical, and almost entirely hands-off. 21. Beef enchilada casserole. Layered tortillas, seasoned ground beef, canned sauce, beans, and cheese baked into a bubbly dish that made weeknight dinners easier. Not traditional, but loved all the same. The 1970s weren't glamorous in the kitchen. They were practical. They were creative. They were about stretching, adapting, and feeding a family no matter what the headline.